Ken here at Waters Garden Center. Tomatoes. How do you grow the biggest, juiciest tomato possible? That's what we're after. It's not as easy as it may appear. It can be a little tricky, but if you know the right friends, they can give you some insight on how to really get the biggest, juiciest, just a nice, juicy, my mouth's watering thinking about it, tomato. We've got John Ford here with Bonide Corporation. His company puts together some of the best tomato products that you could want to use out in the garden. And so I thought John would be a great resource. Welcome, John. Glad you're here.
Glad to be here.
Tomatoes. Where do we start? How do you grow your own tomatoes? How do you get the nice big, I want a slicer and I want it to melt in my mouth kind of tomato?
Well, you got to know a little bit about tomatoes. The larger varieties have to be started earlier in the season. Aces, Beefmaster, Beefsteak, they're about 140 days to production. So they've got to be in the ground January, February, March at the latest.
Yeah.
The intermediate sizes like Better Boy and the medium-sized tomatoes, those can about 110 days to production. And then the small ones, the cherries and the Sweet 100s, could come way later into the season, May, June, because they actually set their fruit in about 75 to 80 days. So timing is important with a tomato plant, but overall, a sunny, warm spot, lots of ground preparation. It has an extensive root system. So, dig a big hole, buy a big pot, not a little pot for tomato plants. Yeah. Deep watering, less frequent, but where I think I'd like to go with this, Ken, is let's tell them how to plant them and get them up growing, and then we'll add some information.
Great idea. So how would you suggest planting a tomato?
Use some of your planter mix.
Yeah.
And incorporate some of the either the tomato vegetable food or a nice all-purpose.
Made our own organic. There you go.
If you put it into the ground before you start, it's often easier to feed that way, then you don't have to worry about anything but watering at that point. Go ahead and plant your plants, and you can actually plant tomato plants deeper, and they'll root from the stem.
Correct, yeah.
But they can actually be planted right at the root level, and buy the ones that are available here at Waters.
I try to buy the tallest, leggiest tomato I can find. I like a nice, chubby, 1 gallon size tomato. That's that big pot, about that big. And I'll bleed off all that foliage, exposing the stem so I can plant it that much deeper into the ground. And I'll prepare my ground with that tomato and vegetable food. And I'll also add some gypsum into that soil at the same time. Can you get a picture of that? Gypsum, just calcium sulfate, lowers the pH, makes the tomato taste better, and the calcium actually reduces blossom end rot, or that black spot that forms on that tomato. I'll blend those into that soil, a nice deep soil, and I'll plant that tomato just as deep as I can. And the goal is so I can water less frequently, but deeper, so the plant can go much longer between water cycles.
I think the important thing is that you're growing the fruit and not the plant. A lot of people are concerned about what a tomato plant looks like, and quite frankly, a few yellow leaves and a lot of fruit is where I'd like to be.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right,
yeah.
Right.
So later in the season, what are you looking at?
Well, later in the season, there's a couple of things that occur, and rapid changes in temperature are what causes the blossoms to drop, or a lack of calcium. And in some cases, a lot of consumers don't understand when to plant the varieties. They come down to Waters, they buy all the tomato plants that they want, and don't understand necessarily that some should have been in the ground earlier and later. We have a product that has an active ingredient that is actually a coconut derivative that tells the plant to pause and think about throwing flowers. So what it does is it encourages the plant to flower earlier, more regularly, holds the blossom. Clitokin is the active ingredient, and you're spraying that on the foliage during the entire growth period. So if you want to take the guess out of
good stuff
and get the plant to produce fruit earlier, that is certainly something that you can use in cucumbers and peppers and a whole host of plants, including grapes. It'll actually encourage.
So tomato and blossom set you can use on grapes.
That's correct.
You can use on cucumbers and beans and squash or whatever, not just tomatoes.
Whatever plants are on the label. It's being widely used on a lot of different plants, but this is regulated for retail use. There's about 10, 15 plants that it can be used on.
Gotcha. Right. This does actually work, folks, especially in the mountains where it gets warm days and then cold nights, warm days, cold nights. It really messes up the plants. This causes them to start setting blossoms.
That's correct.
Earlier.
And then the other product is, and we spoke about it earlier, but the gypsum, if the consumer didn't put gypsum in the soil prior to starting, and they're concerned about getting blossom end rot. Again, that's where the bottom of the fruit rots out. Here's a calcium supplement that can be sprayed on the foliage as the plant grows so that you can prevent it. By the time you get blossom end rot, it's too late. So it's best to be applying it during the season or have applied gypsum at the very beginning of the season.
And what I do, I put this into my gardens because it's such a problem in my own gardens. I'll put this in the ground, and then I'll take one of each of these products. So I'll start in about May, first part of May. I'll put the tomato, the blossom and tomato set. And then every other week I'll trade these two things out. This week I do this one. This week I'll do the rot stop. And I don't have blossom end rot. I don't get that blackening of the fruit, and I get lots of fruits. And those two products work together, and a big size seems to last me about the season. So I get the biggest size of both of these. These are both quart sizes. And then I have nice juicy fruits, a lot of them, without the problems that you get with tomatoes. So thanks, John, for being here on how to grow tomatoes. More of them in your own gardens from Waters Garden Center.